So, hello and welcome. I hope this is recording into our live stream, into our Facebook group. I'm hoping that this is going to actually work. Facebook have decided that they're going to upgrade me to the new live studio version, the live professional version. And so I'm assuming that this is working. If possible, if you can add a comment into the stream, and hopefully that will tell me if this is actually working okay. Yes, excellent. Good. So hello everyone, and welcome to this 24th or 25th of our Tarot On series as we go through the global pandemic of 2020. We're now in about week 2 of the lockdown here in the UK, and our Prime Minister is apparently in good health in the hospital because he actually showed symptoms and was tested positive for Corona-19. So it's an interesting time at the moment. We're hopefully flattening our curve of infections, but we're still under lockdown and probably will be for at least another couple of weeks, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, depending on how things go. So what we're going to cover today is a little bit more NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and tarot. I have a Invisible City story to read about connections and about the connections that we make with people, which is really important. Our government announced today that they're going to give funding to the charity sector, which has been like one of the last sectors. They started with business and then self-employed people, and then there's support for charities as well. And it was quite an interesting speech that the Chancellor of the Exchequer gave. Talking about how we're all in this together and so forth. So irrespective of the politics involved, it was interesting to hear how we get through this together and we support each other together. The Philosopher's Stone deck that I've been using and using for my own private meditations, today my cards were quite strong cards, really. I wonder if I can actually make my screen a little bit bigger. I think I can. There we go. Right, good. So these were my 2 cards for today, which are, if I get this the right way around, Power and Trial. By our work we are changed, that we actually exercise ourselves, our own power when we're faced with trial, and our trial brings out the power that we have to meet it as well. So those 2 cards were slightly more, challenging than any of the other cards have been so far. So again, it's like sticking to what we've set out with our social distancing policies and quarantining and so forth for the long run. That we still have to, keep at it, keep at the anvil, really. So what we're going to cover today is a little bit more of NLP, and if you're not familiar with NLP, I've started to introduce it in the last couple of sessions, if you go back 2 sessions, and what we're going to cover is we've hopefully practiced our linking words and pivot grammar. I've introduced this idea of a triangle of values, self-image and time space, which we're going to keep coming back to. We talked about all of the components for change, which is very important, particularly when we look at belief change, which we're going to do at some point. And I hope we covered truism, and suggestion, which I'm going to briefly come back to today and show how that's used in a tarot card reading, along with this very important new piece of information that I'm going to introduce today called VAKOG, which in NLP is called the representation systems, the rep systems for short. And VAKOG is the simple way of remembering it, VAKOG. Okay, so we're going to come to that. And I hope one of the other things that we have started to introduce with NLP is the fact that we learn it by listening to other people. It's very important to listen to other people and how they sort of, get my head in here, and how they respond to language and the use of language by listening. It's very important to listen very carefully to people through our own use of language. So we have to quieten our own mind down a little bit and listen to other people. And I'm going to introduce a new thing for you to listen to, and also to listen to yourself as well with VAKOG. Now, in NLP, there is there's a set of beliefs called presuppositions. I like to think of them more as presumptions. I don't think they're quite real, certainly not as real as some people take them to be. I think they're very useful. Crowley said actually about the deities and spirits, he was actually stealing this line from Westcott, that it doesn't matter if we believe in them or not, as long as when we call them, they come, as long as they believe in us, really. And I think it's really important to take NLP as a set of models that's useful, but may not be exactly accurate as to what's really going on. But it is a useful sort of coding system to make us aware and act in a certain way, talk in a certain way, listen in a certain way, to achieve change. So, having said all of that, VAKOG is basically the 5 senses, and it's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory, or seeing stuff, hearing stuff, feeling stuff, smelling stuff, and tasting stuff. Okay, so gustatory is tasting stuff, olfactory is smelling stuff. So it's mainly the first two that most people are familiar with, visual and auditory. But the kinesthetic is quite interesting. The feeling side of things is quite interesting, because I've noticed over the years a lot of salespeople that I trained in the past or worked with have a very kinesthetic response to the world. And the interesting thing about these 5 senses is, as we use them in our minds in order to represent the world around us, if we go back to our tree of life, of course, you'll know that what we're talking about in the Kabbalistic senses is just here, our representation between our inner world and our outer world, which actually has the world in it, because this world is a model of this world inside this world. And that's why sometimes these paths down at the bottom aren't drawn, and this world is actually seen as a pendant on the bottom of the tree of life. Is because the world that we're living in now is a sort of astral projection from inside here of what's outside here, because ultimately all of this is obviously one and the same. But the world card is our model. It's our model of the world. So we're sort of inside here most of the time, looking out a sort of outside here, but actually experiencing it as a experience that arises out of that relationship, out of that sort of invisible connection. And in fact, as I mentioned with the tree of life originally, we can't know these are like our invisible cities, but we can know the things that arise out of them, out of the connections between them. I know that sounds abstract, but it is very important as we go along in real terms with what VAKOG is, particularly in terms of Kabbalah and so forth. So VAKOG is the way someone represents the world, and we do it equally. Most of us, all of the time, we have, if we close our eyes and think about the world, we represent it in terms of our 5 senses, because we can't really represent it in a dolphin noise or sonar or batscape or anything, because we don't have those senses. So when we close our eyes and represent the world, when we think about ourselves and what is happening in the world, we either see it, we hear it, we feel it, and sometimes we smell and taste it. Okay, and you'll know that smell is actually one of the senses that is very associated with memory. So if you're doing, this is a sort of pro tip, if you're doing regression work or inner child work, then using smell is a really powerful way of regressing, because it's the actual brain part that works with memory is very close to the one that processes sensory scents and smells and aromas and so forth. So one of the other things as well with VAKOG is that when people change their state, quite often their main representation of the world, the system that they use out of those 5 is switched. So someone who is usually very auditory in the way they think about the world will suddenly get very visual. And someone who is very visual will suddenly get very auditory, particularly if they change state dramatically or in anxiety, a panic attack, a sort of post-traumatic syndrome type event. Quite often the rep system changes, and that's how we know that they've changed their state. Quite often, if I'm doing a path working or an inner guide meditation with a group of people, a guided visualization, I'll be able to see when the people's state has changed, because of when they're describing things, their rep system tends to change from what it was when we were talking normally earlier. So how do you know what representation system someone is working in, and why is it important? What can we do with it? Well, for now, the very simple thing is it's good to gain rapport and understanding with somebody, particularly if we're doing a tarot card reading. And this is from my Psi Cards deck that I've been using many, many years. This is a nice deck because it has cards in it like the no card and yes card and maybe card and things. You'll see that I originally bought this from a place called the, if I can get it in focus, for some reason this particular version of the live stream isn't really focusing with the camera. But anyhow, it came from a place in Nottingham, in Cheshire, called the Tarot Workshop back in the day. They used to have a beautiful catalogue. I used to pore over their catalogue for hours and hours and hours just looking at the pictures of the different decks. And so when we're reading a card for somebody, it's good to know their representation system and speak to it. Just wondering, now that's interesting. Okay, so, right, regression. All right, okay, so again, for some reason, the comment scroll isn't working even in this new version producer of whatever this is called, live video. Yeah, the Psi cards are still available. Originally, interesting backstory. They were looking for someone to take over the sales and production of the Psi cards, and we did volunteer because I love the cards so much as the Tarot Association, but for some reason nothing came off that. Yeah, it's a really nice deck, a very straightforward deck. So when we're talking about a card, whether it's the Psi cards or the Philosopher's Stone deck or normal tarot cards, then we need to, not need to, but it's good to know the rep system that someone is using. Okay, so these are called the Psi cards. Okay. Now, I was trying to remember, it's Maggie Kneen, I think it is Maggie Kneen, or Neen, probably just Maggie Neen, but there's a guy who I think designed them. This was actually produced by US Games originally, but I don't think it is anymore. Anyhow, back to VAKOG. So VAKOG is Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory. And when you listen to somebody, you can hear which system they're using most. Now, a bit like astrologers get very annoyed when you say, I'm an Aries, or what's your sun sign, as if that represents everything about a person, and they know that there's 1,000 other things in their chart, like their rising sign and their aspects and everything else. I get very annoyed when I hear people say, oh, I'm a very visual person, or I'm auditory, or I'm kinesthetic, or that person's auditory. People aren't one thing, they're all five, and they switch between them. But generally speaking, I'm sorry if this is freezing. I might go back to using the old version of this, depending on how this runs. Yeah, so people tend to think about things in one of those five senses most of the time. And that's where we get the idea that someone is visual or auditory. The way that we know that is from their language, because language provides us visual sort of cues as to their rep system. And here's some examples then. So I see what you mean, okay? Or I just can't see what you mean, okay? So I see what you mean. I just can't see what you mean. That's unclear, okay? I just can't see a way through this. It's just like everything's gone dark. Now, all of these things are visual, okay? So when you listen to people, I want you now to start listening to people, as well as listening to when they use linking words, when they use the word just, and so on. I want you to add into your repertoire being able to know if they are using visual language or auditory language. I just can't stand hearing it, okay, is a simple auditory one. Let's all be singing off the same hymn sheet, okay? That could be auditory, it could be visual. It hit me like a punch in the stomach, okay? That's kinesthetic. Let's just stick to the plan, okay? So someone might say, I've got a clear plan, okay? And when they say, I've got a clear plan, they're using visual. It's better to say to them, I see that, rather than, yeah, I've got a good feeling about this. Because if you say, I've got a good feeling about it, that's a kinesthetic one, and they are going visual. Make sense? So when you speak to a client, before the reading, ask them how they found you today, do they have any problems parking, and so on. Just listen to their language, listen when they describe their situation as to whether they're visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Very rarely will you meet someone who's totally olfactory and totally gustatory, taste. It just left a bad taste in my mouth would be a gustatory taste type thing to say. Just something didn't smell right about them. They were just raising a stink. You sometimes hear it, but not often. Most people generally, most of the time, are visual or auditory, and they'll switch between them. But salespeople tend to be gustatory. They, yes, as Diane's saying, answer them in their own language. And you don't have to. You can actually do it cross purposes. There are good reasons for what's called counter-pacing someone. It's a very advanced technique in a sense, because you have to be quick, clever, and do it in real time. And there are good reasons to do that, to throw someone into a totally different state. It's a bit like the sort of Aikido of verbal martial arts. But generally speaking, the first thing to do to make your point is to listen. Just listen. Just listen. Just listen. So when you're listening to someone, you can listen to their language cues. For example, and they're non-verbals. They might say, I just feel so sad. I just feel so sad and I can't see anything in front of me at the moment. So that's feeling and seeing. Okay, you've got two things, but not auditory. So if you're a naturally auditory person and you start saying, can you just repeat that for me? Or are you hearing me? Are you listening to what I'm saying? Have you got that? And so on, doing loads of auditory stuff, it's really going to confuse the other person. And they may feel as if you are miscommunicating to them, and you may feel frustrated that they are not feeling it. I just didn't feel it with that person. Well, you should be able to feel it with that person because you might have just gone for the totally wrong rep system with them. So the first thing to do is to, yes, now I'm coming on to hand gestures. Someone is now starting to pick up on the fact that I'll try and demonstrate something before we start to talk about it, usually. So the other thing is hand gestures. It's like they were just totally deaf to the idea. They just couldn't hear me. I don't know why I waste my time, and they'll do this with their hand, i.e. talking, because they're talking auditory, so the other person might not have given them an auditory answer back. They might have just said, yeah, I get it. Isn't it annoying if you're a very visual person and someone just says to you, yeah, I get it, and they point inside. Now, to them, they've got it. They do get it. It's just because you're visual, you need them to show you in some visual way that they have understood what you are talking about. And the only way that they can do that is by switching their system to say, look, I see what you mean. I see the whole thing. I've got it, and I see it. I really do see what you're saying there. It's fine. I can see where you're going with it. And so just by changing your language slightly to the rep system the other person is using, it's far better for gaining rapport. It's then later better for what's called pacing somebody and leading into an altered state or into a deeper level of communication. So you can then pace their language and then lead their language on. Now, the other thing, as well as hand gestures that you might see, are what are called eye movements. Now, these are not quite what they say in the books at all. Okay, so in practice, they are only useful very briefly and very quickly when you're working with somebody or listening to them. And again, this is great for doing when you're bored, when you're watching television, when you're watching people in a crowd. Now, as Eloy is saying, the body language does tend to back up, and sometimes it will tell you, even if the words don't actually come out. Yeah, are you hearing me? Yeah, that's right. Now, the thing to do is to watch body language in a crowd. So there might be someone speaking on stage, but I always like to watch the crowd behind them sometimes to look at body language and things like that. So the other thing is eye movement, and there's several different models of this, but the best way to do it is to calibrate it in real time. And that is to say, hang on, I'll tell you in a second. Now, if I'm looking up that way, what am I doing? I'm representing something to myself, but my eyes have had to go that way in order to block out some distractions. And I'm usually going visual for something I remember. Okay, so a visual memory is usually to the left and upwards. Okay, so visual is usually upwards. If someone is remembering something, they will tend to go up like that, left, Hang on, I was there yesterday, and I think the main bar area is off to the left as you walk in. Yeah, if you go left, I think that's there. If you go up the other way, though, to the right, as I'm doing it, and to your left, if you're looking at me, if I go up to the right, I'm usually trying to imagine something, i.e. it's a future visual or a made-up visual, like, okay, you've asked me to think of what it would be like if the car park round the corner was full of sand. Okay, so I briefly go, I remember the car park full of sand. Oh gosh, yeah. For some reason, I've got an ice cream van on it. For some reason, a giraffe in the background. But I'm making things up by looking up that way. So looking to the past tends to go left, looking to the future, or imaginary tends to go right, and visual is up. Okay. Auditory tends to be to the side, like what did they say to me? Okay, I will go left and sideways so I can hear their voice, like literally coming in this way. And if it's to the right, then I'm trying to make up what someone might say to me, or I'm a bit worried about the interview in case they ask me, and that will be made up that way. Or I might be thinking of what I'm going to say, in which case I will hear myself saying it and my eyes will go that way. Okay. Kinesthetic tends to go down. So what did it feel like really to go on that roller coaster? Ooh, wow. Okay, I will go down and look to the left. And I don't know what it's going to feel like to be flying for the first time in so long. I will go down to the right because I'm trying to make up a feeling. It is not always accurate. As Evelyn's pointing out, the main thing is to calibrate it in real time. John Grinder, one of the two people who founded NLP, said that he said it in a very technical language, but the other part was it's useful for about 10 minutes. But the actual use of it is because as you're looking to calibrate all of this, you are deeply observing the other person. And that in itself is working a lot more magic than any of the so-called techniques above it. The fact that you are unconsciously and consciously marshalling your attention on the other person is worth its weight in gold anyway, never mind the techniques that we're building on top of them. Okay, so that is VAKOG. Now, in some of the books, you'll see the eye-accessing cues are usually written like with a face, like so. This is why I don't design the art for tarot decks, because this is my level of artwork. And you'll see like arrows go visual, remembered, and visual constructed. So that's visual remembered, i.e. memory, and visual constructed, i.e. something you're making up. Okay, visual remembered, visual constructed. And then the eye movements, for some reason their eyes are slightly below, is auditory record, and guess what? Auditory constructed. So auditory record, auditory constructed, and then of course, if they're looking down, it's kinesthetic record and kinesthetic constructed. So that's what you'll see in some of the books, okay? And again, being observant is a skill. The left-right brain thing, I think, is a bit of a misnomer to some extent. I think the brain is a lot more holistic than just two binary hemispheres. But there are certainly a lot more brain studies nowadays, neurobiological scans of the brain as it's actually working. And one of my favorite ones of late was looking at people imagining their wedding day who hadn't been married. And what they found as they scanned, I think it was a group of women, to imagine their wedding day that they hadn't had yet, the part of the brain that did memory would always fire off first. And it's quite obvious. In order to think of something, in order to visually construct something, guess what you have to do first? Like, to visually construct what your wedding might look like, you have to remember every wedding that you've ever thought of, experienced, seen, been at, watched on television. So your memory activates first before you do the constructing. And that is very important in a tarot card reading. And I'll tell you why. One of the reasons is because in order to create a future, a person will always draw on their past. They can't draw on anything else. So when you are laying out the cards and talking about their past, make sure you include in that some positive resource states, because otherwise all of the future stuff that you give them to tell them to imagine a better life, or after the challenges they're going to be a lot stronger and everything else, they will have a hard time constructing that imaginary future if you haven't helped them recall some positive states in the past. Even if the only positive state in their past is getting to you on time for their reading, that is enough. That is enough. Okay? I can't wrap my head around this. It's very kinesthetic. Very kinesthetic. Middle school eye rolling is actually a sign of contempt. It's a sign of contempt. And interestingly enough, in relationship readings, there is only one thing that a relationship cannot recover from. There is only one key marker of a state between two people that is almost irreparable, generally speaking. If the people hate each other, if the people have been unfaithful, all of these things can be generally either accepted and something change, or forgiven, whatever readdressing of that might be. But contempt in a relationship, if one person has contempt for another, or if both people have contempt, that is one of the real key markers for that relationship is highly likely to fail, be totally irreparable no matter what else happens. Just a side fact for relationship readings. So, right, it's not just pulling up files, it's also the files that you're pulling up are going to change your state, And so you want the person to have a reasonable set of files of their past before you deliver their future. I've seen some terrible things where a reader will literally say, "Oh, that sounds terrible. Oh, that must have been horrible. Oh, you poor thing." And they're trying to show sympathy, but actually what they're doing is sort of projecting their own fears about them being in that situation and what it might feel like for them. And they're basically anchoring the other person in very negative states about their past before they go on to their future. Okay, now I keep holding this particular card up to demonstrate just one quick thing. How we're doing for time? Okay, we're not doing too bad. Which is when you then describe a tree, then it's very important to do it in the language of the person. So that VAKOG is very important. If the person is very visual, then we can say things like, and as you see the tree, then you can see how deep these trunks, these roots go, and how strong the trunk is. Can you see that? And see all of the leaves, how many leaves there are. It's very fruitful, this tree. And do this, actually amplify all of the visuals. If the person has come to you feeling very bad, they're feeling very down, they've got a weight on their shoulders, and that's the way they've described it and so on, when you come to the tree, you say, look how light the tree is. Can you see how it's reaching up from, it's almost like they've got toes in the ground. When you were at the beach, you were saying that you used to go to the beach when you were young and you had your toes in the sand. And just look how the tree is really feeling that groundedness. And so you can use the kinesthetic language to describe the tree. Of course, if they're auditory, you can say, and just imagine this tree. When I talk about the tree in your future, I'm really hearing how the wind rustles through the leaves, and there's so much space in that. Okay. I do not think these comments are part of professionalism. Prevent the reader to be saying comments like that. Not quite sure what that was in connection with. So basically to meet the person in their representation system is quite useful. For you, I would like you to practice just listening. It's fun to do with your partner, with your friends, with someone you don't get on with someone you get on with very well. Listen to the language that they use, look at their eye movements, which can change over time, and just because someone looks up there doesn't mean that they are remembering something that happened, and someone who looks up there is making something up. Sometimes in NLP books they say you can tell if someone is lying by just which way they look, but that isn't true at all. Not generally. Sometimes you can under certain circumstances, but not generally. Otherwise, we would be human lie detectors and infallible at doing it, but it doesn't work like that. Okay, so besides studying, for sure, professionalism, customer service, everything else, the NLP side of things is just one other layer to slot in with all of the other things that we do, including the oracular moment. We might suddenly decide that we are going to say the most outlandish thing for 5 minutes, with no consideration of the other person, their state, or anything else, because the oracle that moment is telling us to. And that's something that we might just do. So all of these things are layered with each other. Okay, so that's VAKOG. So I want you to listen, look for hand movements, think about that past future thing that we talked about. So someone going, I just want, if they do this, I just want to shove it all to one side. They don't even need to say it. Here is their present. They've got something right in front of them, and here is their past. In a client session, particularly a hypnotherapeutic one, I might even reach across and just say, and what would happen if you just moved it all the way over there? And leave their hand up in the air like this. And they'll have to turn and go, well, it would feel a lot further away. And I'll say, yes, and while you look at your hand, feeling that you're holding it up now, and wondering when you're going to start to relax it, it may be easier to close your eyes now or in a moment. It doesn't really matter as long as you can feel your arm still. Because as you feel your arm, you'll notice how your attention is moved in detail to the fingers on the end of your hand. And it's possible as you begin to take those deeper breaths now, then you may be able to wonder, and then we go truism, suggestion, and deepen the state, and before long you have someone in an altered state with their eyes closed going into a deep state, with their arm up like that. And then later on in the working you can actually just slowly get them to lower their arm, only as slowly as they want to go even deeper into the state that is most pleasant for them to do now. It's up to you whether you move your arm slowly or just gently. And as you do, noticing your breathing, your chest out, it's possible for you to alter your state even more now, isn't it? That's right. You can easily just rest as you lower your arm, and so on and so on. So you can immediately break someone's state by interrupting their hand movements, something unconscious like blinking and so on. Yeah, I never calibrate a person first with eye accessing cues because I just accept it in real time there and then, and I never use it again. If I'm going to use it again with the same person, I just do it there and then. Okay, put 50%. Well, one day maybe we'll do a relaxation session, and I'll just demonstrate for 20 minutes an off the cuff trance induction, just to demonstrate some of these methods and so on. It's entirely possible. Okay then, so that's VAKOG. So I want you to go out and astonish yourself by being able to hear, see, hear, feel, smell, taste, how other people think. Because other people think totally differently. It's very strange that other people can think totally different to the way you do. It's just bonkers. Okay then, people, let's read a very short city that goes all the way back to when I was talking about Kabbalah earlier on. Okay. And this is our bedtime story. Incidentally, I spent some time today going through a reading list for the NLP stuff. Obviously, a bit like my tarot collection, I've got like most of the books that have ever been written on NLP and some that weren't. And so I've listed about 20 in different sections, like practitioner books that are good for what's called an NLP practitioner, yes, I was going to say, actually, don't go out. Just watch the television in your bunker. Okay, you can switch the sound off and watch non-verbal gestures. You can listen to it with the sound on. And one day, when we get out of all of this, then you'll be able to see real people in groups, even. More than 2 people at a time exhibiting all of these things, which will be quite overwhelming by the time we get to that point. So, so the book list has practitioner things, which are like beginner stuff, master practitioner things, which are slightly more advanced methods, the background of NLP, hypnotherapy, and a lot of Erickson's stuff, and a few things about working with clients that are quite useful for tarot card readers as well. So I will finish listing all of those, and then put some links into Amazon and stuff, and put those on a website somewhere, and link it in the Facebook group. So here we go. In Ersilia, the city of Ersilia, to establish the relationships that sustain the city's life, the inhabitants stretch strings from the corners of the houses, white or grey or black and white, according to whether they mark a relationship between the houses of blood, of trade, of authority, or agency. When the strings become so numerous in the streets that you can no longer pass amongst them, the inhabitants leave. The houses are dismantled. Only the strings and their supports remain. From a mountainside, camping with their household goods, Ersilia's refugees look at the labyrinth of taut strings and poles that rise in the plain. This is the city of Ersilia still, and they are nothing. They rebuild Ersilia elsewhere. They weave a similar pattern of strings, which they would like to be more complex and at the same time more regular than the other. Then they abandon it and take themselves and their houses still further away. Thus, when travelling in the territory of Ersilia, you come upon the ruins of abandoned cities, without the walls which do not last, without the bones of the dead, which the wind rolls away. Spider webs of intricate relationships seeking a form. It's the city of Ersilia in Invisible Cities by Italo. Calvino. And perhaps it's also a description of the relationship between the Sephiroth and the paths on the Tree of Life. So thank you for your time and attention. Get VAKOGing and listening to people through those 5 filters. Notice if they change their state, if they change their language. Notice the keywords and bring those back to the discussion tomorrow. That would be very interesting to hear what you hear, see what you see, feel what you've felt. Okay, thanks a lot for your time and attention. And the first thing to do is the listening first, because then it's the way we learn language in the first place. Big trick of NLP, the way I teach it, is we learn language when we're young and by listening and being surrounded by it. Therefore, the best way to learn language patterns is not to practice them and be clever with them or learn them, is just to listen, and to listen a lot. And then you might find yourself just talking about the tree in a very, very different way the next time you talk about it, for no good reason other than you're listening. Okay, thanks a lot. Good evening. Stay safe, stay sane, and see you tomorrow. Bye for now.